the way that gets put oftentimes. Don't let that confuse you. Okay. And yes, we do have statues. There's pictures of them in stained glass windows and things like that. Sometimes you hear, oh yeah, old Catholics, you know, praying to those statues. You know, what's the matter with those there? Well, here again, do you have pictures of people that you love around your house? Of course you do. Why do you do that? You don't believe the pictures of them, do you? But it reminds you of it, doesn't it? And sometimes it kind of helps you feel like maybe you're a little more connected to them or something, right? Especially maybe if they're deceased. Well, sure it does. Well, why can't you do that with a statue or a picture in stained glass? We don't think the statue is God or even that person. But it reminds us of the person. And we're asking to pray along with us. That's all. That's all it is. It's pretty natural. Pretty simple. So how do you appreciate it? Well, that can be very interesting. Sometimes it makes sense, you know, because it was a quality the person had or a part of their life or something like that. Other times, honestly, I just scratch my head and think, how in the world did they become a patron saint? Like, you know, beats me. I mean, there's some kind of history to it, but sometimes it's sort of hard to figure. You know,
St. Anthony you mentioned, wasn't he the patron saint of lost causes?
well, people pray to him a lot.
Yeah.
Not lost causes, lost things.
Lost items.
Okay.
But see, that's a good example because that really is, at least as far as I know, that really didn't have a thing to do with his life.
Yeah, this place they thought
Maybe, I don't know. He was an early Franciscan. You know, he actually, his life overlapped a little bit with Francis of Assisi himself. In his own lifetime, he was well known for his preaching. And he was the first Franciscan to actually be allowed to study theology and to become a priest. That's what the man was known for. How in the world people started asking him to help them find lost stuff? I don't know. I'll tell you it works. But,
I've done it since I was a kid.
but I don't know how that happens or how that became associated with Frank. Okay, let's like Francis of Assisi, for example. And a lot of them do make sense. It certainly wasn't the crux of his life or anything, but he did have an interesting relationship with nature and animals. He's often portrayed that way. And so when it comes to something involving animals, you know, whether it's farm animals or pets or what have you, people often call on Francis of Assisi. Now that kind of makes some sense. You can see that. But the patron saint just means well, that people pray to him for that particular reason. For example, would be one who is a patron saint of hopeless situations and causes. So Danny Thomas, for example, I think knowing that, founded a hospital in Memphis and named it St. Jude's Hospital, Children's Hospital. What kind of patients do they take? Really hopeless causes involving children. No, that makes some sense. That makes sense. But others, And you know how it is. I think it makes sense. You know, say your favorite team. Probably most everybody here likes Kentucky basketball.
Negative.
There's got to be one in the crowd. Most everyone likes Kentucky basketball. It's sick.
Yeah,
In the state.
Yeah.
In the
There's,
state.
you know, a lot of the people outside of Kentucky hate Kentucky
Well,
basketball.
I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean all the world.
I don't know, you talk to some UK fans, I feel like that.
Well, that's
You call
probably
it
true.
inclination.
In this room, except Donna,
Cameron.
I think
Cameron.
Cameron likes Kentucky basketball,
Fair enough.
but just play along.
All right.
So, I'm older than you guys, so I'm trying to think of more. Let's say, what was it, two
You're the baby, remember?
2 years ago, remember they went to the final game and lost to Connecticut? But getting there, there was about 3 games in a row in the tournament. They won it on the last second shot. It was usually Aaron Harrison. Okay, remember all that. Okay, well, when you're older and, you've got grandkids and you're sitting back telling them, yeah, I remember back, 2014, the NCAA tournament, and you might embellish the story just a little bit. Oh, you should have seen, man, the guy was 10 feet tall and he shot right over him, I mean, it was nothing but, man, how we tend to do that, don't we? Legends grow and are born and the story becomes a little embellished. Well, sometimes that happens with saints. Sometimes there's a legend that begins to surround the person. And people sort of embellish the story, as it were. But it isn't necessarily who the person really was. So a good example of that that comes to mind would be St. George. Well, there's a legend that he slayed a dragon. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer. No, that's not true, right? What he was in reality was an early church martyr. He was an early church martyr. They didn't slay a dragon. Where stuff like that comes from, how we people can do. Okay? So sometimes you'll hear that. You'll hear legend. Yes, sir.
Norma and I, we were talking about Ruth. Of course, she was in the Old Testament. That she was Canaanite. Not correct. The reason I say that is we look up St. Ruth. And they talk about being in the Old Testament. She was a judge over here.
I think she is a saint.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Yeah.
When I asked if there were many from the, before Christ that they canonized and maybe.
Were they declared saints,
Yeah.
or just
Yeah.
kind of presumed they were? Yeah, I think so. That was early on, before there was much of a process,
Right.
as it were. I think about the quickest a person's ever been declared a saint. I could be wrong, or it could be somebody faster, but I think it was Francis of Assisi. He was declared a saint only 2 years after he died. He was, he's probably, arguably, perhaps, the most popular saint of all time, and he was just an enormous figure in his own time. That certainly wasn't the way he lived his life. He didn't want any of that. But that's kind of what happened. People noticed. And people do notice. Holiness is attractive. Isn't it? Holiness is attractive. People flocked to Mother Teresa. I heard a guy tell the story. I think she came to, I don't know, Louisville, somewhere not too far from there. Whatever it was, he was there. And he never, spoke to her or anything, but as she was kind of traveling to where she was trying to get to, walking, he was on the other side of the fence from her. And she did kind of stop and talk to some people, and she looked at him, and that was it. All she did was look at him. And I mean, he broke down in tears just telling the story. He said, the look in her eyes, I have never in my entire life, before or since, seen such absolute, utter love come out of a human being. All he did was look in her eyes. That's attractive. That's attractive. Padre Pio, canonized fairly recently. He only died in 1968. He was a Franciscan friar, Italian. When he would celebrate Mass, it would take 3 hours. He was so absolutely, totally absorbed in the presence of God. And when he was a priest, it took 3 hours, and people didn't care. They were flocking to get in. Over here it's like, come on, the hour is up. Get on with it, man. Didn't care. Holiness is attraction. Here's the last thing that Canaan need to say about saints. Sometimes I think that we create these super heroic figures and sort of put them up on a pedestal. Sometimes I think maybe at least one of the reasons why we may do that is so that we don't have to try to be like them. But the truth is, they're not up there. They're down here, where we are. And the truth is that any human being, all human beings are capable of being saints. And not only capable, but are actually called to be saints. It's what sometimes is called the universal call to holiness. Every single one of us is called to be holy by God. And He'll do it when we make up our mind we're going to that. When we set out on the road and we don't turn back, it can happen. And there are saints that aren't officially declared so. Many